So, which is fine. We're not doing a series. We're just doing a couple standalones. We've got 2 midweeks left before summer. So, I'm not going to do a series. We're just literally going to do. This is actually my last one because Steve's going to give the last one. So Steve's going to do the message on the last night of the semester. So,
good. Prepped. Ready for some Jesus.
Get ready. I don't know what we're going to talk about. It'll be good. All right, so tonight we're going to talk about friendship and just kind of like how to be a good friend, who do I need to be a good friend to, all of that stuff. But before we do that, I thought of some pretty famous duos, so I hope y'all can help me out. All right, I'm going to name half of a famous duo, and I'm going to see how culturally relevant you guys are. Okay, so the first one, I'm going to give you an example. If I say Batman, you would say? Robin. Okay, good. I didn't know if y'all knew that, but that's good. Okay, good. If you're a Nickelodeon fan, we had Drake and
Josh.
Right, classic. What about, anybody watch the show Friends?
Yup.
Okay. You have Joey and
Chandler,
that's correct.
and sandwiches.
Sandwiches, that's right. My favorite show, The Office, there's only one right answer for this. Don't mess this up. Michael Scott and Dwight Schrute would be the correct answer. Yes, great job. You ever seen that show? Probably a little too old for you. SpongeBob and Patrick. And then my favorite cartoon, of all time, Toy Story. You have Woody and Buzz, right? So we have these like duos of people all over our pop culture scene, right? So we're good, right? But we know who we're talking about with those duos. I didn't go way too old for you guys. Y'all know who we're talking about here. You know these people? Okay, good. Y'all were the ones I was worried about. We got some middle schoolers. I don't know if they watch Friends. I don't know if they ever heard of The Office.
I've heard of The Office.
SpongeBob, at least.
It all the time.
There you go.
As he should.
That's a great show. All right, so tonight we're going to unpack the story from Jesus, but instead of asking the question of who's my friend, we're actually going to ask the question of who is my neighbor. Okay, so before we dive into that, I'm going to tell you a story about one of my best friends. His name is Vince. So Vince and I were friends since middle school. We became really good friends in high school. Like Vince was the guy that if I wanted to go fishing, like we would just go fishing all night in the summer, just go hang out. We would run together. We did a half marathon together. We would play FIFA together. Best of 7 FIFA games, like playing 90 minutes, best of 7 games is what we would do. Like me and Vince were like together all the time in high school. And even for a brief time in college, he actually lived with me for like 2 semesters. Right? So it was really easy to be a good friend to Vince when life was easy. We had a pretty easy life in high school. So we fast forward. It is my junior year of college, and Vince calls me and says he's getting married. He's in the military. He's getting married. He found somebody that he wanted to spend the rest of his life with. Congratulations, he got married. About a year and a half later, they have a little girl. So end of my junior year, they have a little girl. And then the end of my senior year, he calls me and he's like, getting a divorce. Oh, wow, okay. So walked with him through that. And then the worst part of this is that his ex-wife became like really mean is the best way to say that, to where she wouldn't even let him like FaceTime his little girl or talk to his little girl, just like one of those ugly divorce scenes. I'm sure we've all heard of people's stories about divorce and how ugly they can get. So more than when I was in high school, Vince needed a friend at that point in time in life. And the whole reason I tell this story is because when life gets messy and hard, you really figure out how much you need a really good friend. So when you think about those kind of times in your life, you can start naming off characteristics of good friends, right? We could all name probably 5 or 6, 7 things that we would say, hey, this makes a good friend. I would hope, right? What's crazy is like I was starting to think back to whenever me and Vince were in high school, and like we were connected as friends, but like when he would leave my house or we would leave school, I didn't have texting until I was like a junior in high school. Like I didn't really talk to him much because we just didn't have that. I think now we're more connected now, even though we live so far away. And that's something I should feel really lucky about. With your friends, you guys can be connected all the time. Crazy thing is though, I think the more connected that we are now, it's probably actually harder to have real meaningful relationships. If you think about it, you think about our world and how we break things down, we live in a world that is literally trying to pit you against somebody else all the time. Like everybody that breaks down thinks it's all about us versus them, right? My team versus your team, my school versus your school, Democrats versus Republicans, men versus women, black versus white, Christian versus not Christian, gay versus straight. like we have all these things where culture just tells us that we're supposed to be so pitted against one another. I don't think it was intended to be that way. Right? So even though we're more connected than ever, globally we're probably more divided than we've ever been. So I want to tell you a little secret. This is really hard for me to admit because I'm one that will say I don't really need anybody, that I'm really confident on my own and I want to be strong and independent. But if you ask and you get down to the root and the truth of every single person living on earth, no matter how much they'll deny it, every single person was made to have an intimate, deep, meaningful relationship with humans. It's just how we were designed. That's how God made us. We had a need for other people in our lives. So I want to challenge you tonight to think a little bit differently when I'm talking about friendship. Because I think that maybe the problem is that we just don't do friendships the right way. So my hope for you tonight is that through this story that Jesus tells, we learn what it's like to be a good neighbor, and learning what it's like to be a good neighbor makes us a better friend. Cool? All right, so I'm going to tell you a story within a story, and it's actually going to be found in Luke chapter 10. So if you have your Bibles tonight, you can look there. I'm actually going to summarize more than I'm going to actually read, and so if you don't have your Bible tonight, it's okay. But I would encourage you at some point in time after tonight, check out this story because there's a lot more that we're really going to have time to actually dive into. Okay? I'm just going to set this up for you. So he is about to tell a story of a good Samaritan. You've probably heard this term before because this term is actually just a phrase that we will use in our language of a good Samaritan. A good Samaritan is doing something for somebody just out of the goodness of your heart. Right? There's actually laws in place, like if you try to help somebody out on the side of the road that's in a car accident and you actually hurt them worse, they can't sue you because you were just trying to be a good Samaritan. It's called a good Samaritan law. Those come from this story. Okay, so I'm going to pick this up in Luke chapter 10. I'm going to start in verse 29. I'm going to read through it, and then I'm going to try to give you another version of this story in more of a context that we'll understand. Okay, so just listen as I read through this, and then we'll come back and tell you a modern day piece of this. All right, so Luke chapter 10, verse 29 says, "But he, desiring to justify himself, said to Jesus, 'Who is my neighbor?'" All right, so this story picks up, and all these smart guys are in a room with Jesus, and they've asked him, "How do I have eternal life?" So Jesus gives them the answer that they already know. In that time, they know that if you have to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, strength, and then love your neighbor as yourself. That was the rule that was written in the Jewish customs. They knew it. And so when Jesus answers that way, they say, okay, well, who's my neighbor? So Jesus tells this story. "A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho, and he fell among robbers, who stripped him, beat him, and then departed, leaving him half dead. Now by chance, a priest was going down that road, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. So likewise, a Levite is somebody in that time who was held still in high regard, a good person. When he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, as he journeyed, came to where he was, and when he saw him, he had compassion. He went to him and bound up his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. He then set him on his own animal and brought him to an inn and took care of him. The next day he took 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper and said, 'Hey, take care of him. Whatever more you spend than this, I will repay you when I come back.'" This is a story that Jesus tells the people as to who is the neighbor. So one thing you've got to pick out from the story is he is talking to a Jewish crowd, and he is saying that the Samaritan person is the one who did the correct thing. You have to understand, these people hated Samaritans. Matter of fact, they looked on Samaritans as somebody who was like less than half a human. They didn't even think that they were really worth being called a human. They did not like Samaritans. So Jesus saying this guy is the one who got it right caused a little controversy. Okay? So I want to read this in a context that maybe you'll understand. Okay? So I try to write this down in maybe a 2022 version of it. So see if you can pick out these characters in this story. All right? So there was a kid at school and his name was Josh. Josh spent most of his days by himself and really didn't have any friends. See, he was new in town, and the truth is that Josh really wasn't that nice to people. If he did say something to someone, it was usually pretty mean. He always had his AirPods in, and to Josh, everything that anyone ever did was lame. Josh carried himself like he was better than everyone in his school. Matter of fact, at first, a few people tried to be nice to this new kid, but he just pushed them away. Josh was a loner down to his very core, and he made sure that everyone else kept their distance. Think about this for a second. We all know somebody like Josh. I want you to picture the face of that person that comes to mind when we think of somebody in this description. Someone who maybe doesn't think like you, act like you, talk like you, look like you, believe like you. I want you to picture that person. All right, this is the person that when you're assigned them as a group project partner, you're like, oh, great. Like, this is the person I'm talking about, okay? So one day a group of guys decide, hey, we want to have our own fun with Josh. He's an easy target. Nobody's ever around him. He doesn't have any friends. So between the final 2 periods of the day, we're just going to jump him in the bathroom. Somebody film it. We'll get a rise of it on social media. So the word gets around and people were planning to actually show up and take part in this. So along comes a straight A student, someone who the school would hold in high regards, and they just really couldn't believe the immaturity of her classmates. So when she heard about the fight that was about to happen, she thought to herself, I'd rather be in the library anyways. It's far enough from where the fight's going to happen. I don't really have to be involved. I'm just going to stay out of it. So she decided that she would mind her own business and just stay in the library. After all, being the top of her class was her highest priority. Luckily for Josh, a church kid happened to walk by the bathroom before this happened. He saw that a crowd had gathered around and a few people had their phones out. We've all been there. We know when the fight's about to go down. He really didn't know Josh all that well, but he had heard rumors about Josh being a part of some sketchy stuff. So this church kid knew that if he stepped in, he would end up being late to class, and his parents already told him if you're late again, you're going to be grounded. Okay. Not only that he'd be grounded, but his parents told him that he wouldn't be able to go to youth that week if he had one more target. So this church kid decides just to leave the bathroom and walk out before anyone really notices that he's there. Then this fight happens. Right, the first guy takes Josh to the ground. Another 3 guys start punching, kicking, hitting him over and over again. To Josh, it seems like an eternity. So he's cowering on the ground, trying the best he can to protect himself. Then walks in just your typical average teenager. He sees the commotion and everything that's happening, and he steps in and he yells, hey, stop, cut it out. What are you guys doing? Leave him alone. Everyone who was there, kind of caught up in the moment, they just freeze. They stop filming, they stop watching, and they stop hitting, and they start to just kind of break up and go on about their day. As everyone was leaving, this random teenager who stepped in and stood up for Josh stays and makes sure that Josh is okay. He didn't stop at just standing up for Josh. Matter of fact, he helps him, he walks him down to the front office, walks him into the nurse's area, gets him cleaned up, gets some ice. See, the day that Josh was beaten up, he was completely humiliated. Right, this random average teenager steps in and stood up for who nobody else did. So, over the next few weeks, this teenager and Josh actually start to become friends. Josh really hadn't found a group that he could fit in with, and he found a person with this teenager who saw him for who he was, but also saw him for who he could be. So I have to ask, who's the right person in this school? Is it the straight A student who just minds her own business and stays out of everything? Is it the church kid who just hurries out of the bathroom? Or is it the random, everyday, average teenager who steps in and says, hey, enough's enough? See some nods, so I'm going to guess that we are all in the same boat, and we would say, hey, the right answer is the last person. The one that steps in and says, hey, enough is enough. In both of these stories, both Jesus' story and this one, it's very easy to see who is the best neighbor. The Samaritan, and then, of course, your random average teenager. But the better question, I think, is for you to ask yourself, who are you in that story? Would you have done what the Good Samaritan did? Would you have stepped in and been a friend to somebody who needed you?